You're listening to PetLifeRadio.com.
You've had a long day at work, and you can't wait to just get home, take off your shoes, plop yourself down in your favorite chair, and relax. You walk up to your tranquil residential home and your neatly manicured lawn in your quiet suburban neighborhood, put the key in the lock, open the door, and... Yes, the pets have gone wild! What were you thinking? Welcome to the show about everything you always wanted to know about exotic pets. Where to get them, what to feed them, and how to care for them. You'll even find out why some people live with a monkey. Now, here's your host, exotic pet expert and author, Bob Tart. Hey, Bob, what were you thinking?
Hi, I'm Bob Tart, author of Enslaved by Ducks and Foul Weather, and welcome to What Were You Thinking? Before I get to my guest, Russ Wilson, I wanted to mention some good news about my first book, Enslaved by Ducks. This is something I'm really excited about. About a year and a half ago, Linda and I mentioned on What Were You Thinking that Patricia Heaton of Everybody Loves Raymond, and she has a new show called The Middle, she purchased the dramatic rights option to Enslaved by Ducks. What this means is that for a certain period of time, she had the sole rights to develop a TV show or a movie based on my book. Well, the rights were just about to expire and she hadn't done anything with it, and so we were thinking, well, it's just one of those things. But I just received an email 2 weeks ago from Patricia, and she told me that she was renewing the option for another 18 months and was very optimistic about getting a movie made based on Enslaved by Ducks. In fact, she already has a script for it. She even signed someone to play me, which is very exciting, but I'm sworn to secrecy on the subject. I can definitely say one thing, though, it won't be George Clooney. Okay, so Linda and I are keeping our fingers crossed, and we hope that my book about our pet ducks, rabbits, parrots, geese, and more will become a feature film. I'll keep you posted as I learn more. For information on my two books, Enslaved by Ducks and Foul Weather, please go to my website, bobtart.com. That's BOBTARTE.com. And if you want to be a guest on What Were You Thinking, if you have an interesting pet that you want to talk about, just email me at bob@petliferadio.com. That's all there is to it. Back in the 1970s, I kept aquarium fish with varying degrees of luck, mostly not very good. One day I went to a local pet store that had a really nice fish section. It was a really good neighborhood store that is unfortunately long gone. I bought a little frog to live with the fish. He was very fun to watch. He'd come swimming to the top for fish food. Unfortunately, even though the tank was covered, the frog managed to get out, and I never saw him again. I only had him a couple of weeks. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I'm wondering if he was the same kind of frog that my guest, Russ Wilson, has been telling me about. He is African clawed frog Hito. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Russ. He's been keeping all manner of exotic pets for over 30 years, from sugar gliders and leopard geckos to hermit crabs and even feather duster worms. Russ lives in Utah, and he has volunteered and worked in zoos, and he has had a particular fondness for frogs ever since his first trip to the local pond as a child. So, hey, Russ, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you. Thanks so much for emailing me about Hito. Does that sound like the same as the frog I might have had or not?
It could be. In fact, that's a common issue with this type of frog. If they have access to emerging from the tank, they generally will. So it's fairly likely. There are really only a couple of types of aquatic frogs that commonly show up in pet stores. There's the African clawed frog, and then there's the African dwarf frog. There's actually a couple of species of that type, but it was probably one of those two.
Well, could you describe, I don't think it'll jog my memory because this was so long ago, but can you describe what the African clawed frog looks like?
Sure. Well, first of all, they're sort of a chubby frog. They have very robust, thick back legs. Their front legs are somewhat thinner, and they're sort of flattened. When you think of a frog sitting on the lily pad, as we often think of them, they sort of have their their hind end touching the lily pad, and their head sort of goes up at a 45-degree angle.
Sure.
But this sort of frog is kind of flat, and they have very large webbed back feet. Their front limbs are much smaller, with 4 fingers on them, and they are not webbed. And their eyes are oriented almost straight up, and they don't have eyelids. And so that's a distinctive feature in contrast to most frogs that have the eyes kind of on the sides of the head. So they're pretty distinctive in those ways.
Are they built this way because they spend all or most of their lives in water?
Exactly. They're very well adapted to spending their lives in water, and by choice, they'll spend all of their time in the water without ever leaving it. But if the little pool that they live in nature starts to dry up, they can do one of 2 things. They can either travel overland in wet weather and look for another pond, or they can actually estivate in the mud, and once the mud dries, they're perfectly fine kind of encased in a little cocoon there, and they can go for months and perhaps even longer just waiting for better conditions.
And then when it rains or whatever, that releases them and sort of wakes them up?
Exactly.
Wow, that's amazing. I wish I could do that.
Me too.
Yeah. Where do you keep Hito?
I have him in a 20-gallon aquarium with a glass lid on the top, and with the water level probably about 3 inches below the top, so that he's not tempted to take a trip.
Okay, because I wanted to ask you if there was a matter of too much, or I guess too little water would be easy. You wouldn't want to keep him in just an inch or 2, but you can keep this frog in a fairly large tank.
Right.
There's no downside. They like to go pretty deep?
Well, you wouldn't want it too deep. This is a 20-gallon long tank, so it's probably about 1 foot deep, and with the water level down, it's probably more like 9 inches deep. And that gives him a chance to be able to reach the surface fairly easy. If he were in a tank that were 2 feet deep, for example, he would probably survive but not be entirely comfortable. They like to be able to put their legs onto something, kind of stretch out their whole body with their hind legs holding onto a plant or something like that, and just poke their nose out above the water once in a while.
Okay. So how large will he get?
Well, I've seen some pictures of wild-caught African clawed frogs that will basically cover the palm of a grown man's hand, just with their body. That's not even with their legs extended. They can get pretty large. A lot of times in protected environment, when they grow up among humans, they don't get quite as big. But Hito's body from snout to vent is probably about 3 inches long, and if you added the legs, maybe another 3 inches, so maybe 6 inches altogether when he's stretched out.
Oh, that's a decent-sized frog, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember the one I had was tiny. It was probably, as you say, from nose or snout to vent, he was probably only about 1 inch.
Yeah, and it really could be either species. It could be the African clawed frog or the African dwarf, because they're both sold at approximately that size.
Okay.
In that size range.
Is that the size that Hito was when you got him?
Actually, I got him when he was even smaller. He was a tadpole, in fact.
Oh, my gosh.
These are available from several different companies as available as tadpoles, even eggs in some cases.
Tell me about raising the tadpole.
It's really pretty interesting because the tadpoles of this species of frog are very different from others. Most tadpoles are herbivorous, and they have sort of a beak that they use to scrape algae off of rocks and sticks and whatnot, and they'll also eat, basically any animal or vegetable matter they can get their beak on, so to speak. This species, in contrast, is a filter feeder. So it strains algae and bacteria and protozoa and so on from the water column, and cannot eat anything off of the bottom of the aquarium or anything like that. So you do need to provide something of that sort that they can eat, and they constantly are suspended in the water, unlike most tadpoles, which will go to rest on the bottom and sit still. This type keeps itself in a head-down, tail-up orientation, wiggling the tip of its tail, kind of creating a current that allows food to sweep by, and it'll ingest that food in the water.
Do you have any pictures of him as a tadpole?
I do.
Oh, I would love to see that.
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy. I actually thought it would be fun to document his metamorphosis. So from the day I received him until the day he had completed his metamorphosis, I have a picture of each day.
That is Amazing. Did you, this is a silly question, but when you order a tadpole, you just order one, assuming that it's going to be in good health and easy to keep?
Well, the company I ordered it from, they have a guarantee that if anything happens to the tadpole, that you can receive a replacement.
What did you put in the water for him to eat when he was a tad?
Well, there are several things you can do, and I know that the company and other companies produce food that you can use. You can also get some food that's produced for egg-laying fish, so very small particulate matter that you can use. I used a culture of green water that I produced myself, just basically single-celled algae that I was growing for another one of my fish projects, and he did fine on that.
So you just introduced some of that to the water.
Right.
And what would you do? Would you have lighting or something on the tank so that it would continue to grow and spread or not?
Well, I had the other tank in which I was culturing this single-celled algae had a light source. So I would just continue to add this every day or every other day, just add a bit of that to his.
What kind of a tank was he in when he was a tadpole? Was it the 20-gallon?
No, it was quite small. It was probably about a quart, just to be able to maintain control of the area. You don't want to have to introduce a lot of food into the small area. You want to be able to make sure that the food is accessible, and you'd have to put a lot of it in.
Right.
If the container were large. So just kept him in that small one, and then by frequent partial water changes was able to keep it clean and a healthy environment for him.
So you got him as a tadpole, and how long did it take from the day you got him until he, became a frog?
I'd have to look it up to be exactly sure, but I think it was about 4 to 6 weeks.
Boy, what a fun thing to watch.
It was quite amazing. In fact, I had done it before. Years ago, I had some other frogs of this sort, which I would probably still have, except I spent 3 years in Hawaii, and unfortunately this species of frog is illegal there, and so I wasn't able to take them and had to find new homes for those other frogs. But yeah, I've watched the process several times now, and it's fascinating every time.
Wow. Does his tank need to be heated?
Well, I don't have a heater in there currently. If the temperature is between about 65 into the mid-70s, they don't really need any supplemental heating. And so he's done fine.
Yeah. How long have you had him?
It's been a little over a year. He arrived in 2008, September 9th.
Okay. What is the life expectancy?
They can live quite a long time. I know that records surpass 20 years.
20 years? Wow. Well, you have a friend for a long time, possibly.
Yeah. I'm hoping that he'll be around for a while.
Now, you said in your email to me about how, as a youth, you got interested in frogs at the pond. What kind of experiences did you have?
Well, at the time I was living in Washington State, right along the coast, where it is very, very rainy. And so there were Pacific tree frogs all over the place, in our tomato plants in the garden, in the grass that grew around the sandbox, everywhere. And so I was very interested in those for as long as I can remember. And we found from our neighbors that there was a frog pond just a stone's throw from the house in the woods nearby. And so I persuaded my father to take me down there, and we went and caught some tadpoles, and from then on I've been hooked.
Right. Now, do you know, in fact, that Hito is a he, or is that just sort of a convention?
It's kind of funny, because I was hoping that he would turn out to be a he, and he did. When I named him Hito, although that being a Japanese name, there are variations on that name that could be male or female, but I guess that's beside the point. Anyway, I was hoping he would be a male because the males sing quite a bit. And having had males before, I was hoping to be able to enjoy that again. Had a lot of fun with that. So he was about 6 months old when he started singing and confirmed that he was a male. And
we will listen to that song in just a minute or so. We're coming up on a break. Russ was kind enough to pronounce Hito's name for me because it's spelled H-I-R-O. What is the meaning of the name, if it has one?
Oh, I'm not sure exactly. I know that we named him Hito after a character from a television show.
Oh, what TV show was that?
It's called Heroes, appropriately enough. It's kind of a show about people with special powers.
Right. I've seen ads for it. I haven't seen the show, though.
Okay. And we enjoyed one of the characters so much, and he had a fun personality, and since these frogs tend to have a lot of personality, we decided to give him that name.
Well, we're going to get into this in a little more depth and hear about the quirks and also enjoy a song from Hito. We're coming up to a break right now. You're listening to What Were You Thinking? And after this word from the sponsor, we will be right back.
What Were You Thinking? We'll be right back after Bob gets the ducks out of his living room. Don't go away.
It's time for school for you and your friends, your furry best friends. Train your dog the fun and easy way with Teacher's Pet Sessions. Teacher's Pet host Pia Silvani teaches you step-by-step how to train your dog the fun and easy way. You get 8 30-minute live audio training sessions, complete transcripts of each session, plus a basic training manual to get you and your dog off to a great start. Training begins the moment you bring your dog home. Teacher's Pet Sessions offers positive reinforcement training to shape your dog's behavior and encourages upbeat, enthusiastic responses to ensure that your dog will enjoy learning. Teacher's Pet Sessions dog training is fun at both ends of the leash. So listen, learn, and laugh with your dog with Teacher's Pet Sessions. Get your copy of Teacher's Pet Sessions Volume 1 today. To order, go to teacherspetsessions.com.
Hi, this is Pia Silvani, your host. Bring your dog, tug toy, and treats, and get ready to have some fun.
teacherspetsessions.com.
Give your dog some thought with Dog Thoughts. It's the iPhone application that everyone's talking about.
Hey, what do you think of this? A man in Davis, California says he's invented an application for the iPhone that claims it can read your dog's mind. Huh? No, it's true. I read about it on my cat's Twitter page. That's why I
Jay Leno talked about it, CBS reported on it, and now you can see what all the buzz is about. Created just for dog lovers, Dog Thoughts makes taking photos of your furry best friend more fun. Shake your dog and read his mind. On your iPhone, of course. Take a pic of your pup, shake your phone, and watch as his thoughts appear on the screen. Does he have a bone to pick with you, or is he having a tail-wagging day? Get your Dog Thoughts iPhone app today. Just 99 cents. Go to PetLifeRadioPromotions.com. That's PetLifeRadioPromotions.com.
Aquariums and pond keeping are among the most popular of all hobbies in the United States and throughout the world. In fact, fish are probably the most numerous pet in people's homes and in their businesses. In Aquarium Mania, we'll learn more about the secret and not so secret life of fish and other inhabitants, the basics of good aquarium keeping, the complexities of the aquarium industry, and the science and art that surround this fascinating hobby. I'm your host, Roy Anong, and I'd like to thank you for joining us. Aquarium Mania.
Every week on demand. Only on PetLifeRadio.com.
Let's talk pets.
Let's talk pets
On Pet Life Radio.
Pet Life Radio.
PetLifeRadio.com. Okay, ducks are in the pond, rabbits in his hutch, and monkeys... Ow! In my car! Oh, okay, well, I go check my insurance policy. We'll turn you back over to Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob Tart, author of the books Enslaved by Ducks and Foul Weather. I'm speaking with Russ Wilson in Utah about his African clawed frog, Hito. Let's listen to the song. Wow. That's really interesting. I have two questions for you. First of all, besides the trilling, I'm hearing some other sounds in the background. Are those sounds that the frog is making or just the trilling?
He's actually making both sounds. Those are the sounds of him as he kind of moves around the tank.
Okay. All right.
Knocking against the bottom and the glass and so on.
Oh, okay. So he was quite active when he was making that.
He was, especially at the end there. You can hear how the song sort of changes, and that's when he saw me, and decided to go up to the top and beg for food.
That
song always changes.
That is great. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, part of the reason I love these frogs is because they do have a lot of personality, and they definitely recognize feeding time, and they recognize their principal food provider. And so whenever you come near the tank, they'll do several things. One of the, I think, most endearing and funniest things they'll do is they'll actually start cramming their front legs or their forelimbs into their mouth as if they were shoving food into their mouth.
Oh my gosh.
And as a sort of a signal or anticipation, whatever it is, they'll do that. Or sometimes they will just clap their front limbs together, and it looks a lot like a human clapping, and so that's a lot of fun.
That is just wonderful.
Yeah, and that's just one of the many things that makes them so fun to keep.
And so when you come in, does he know that certain times of the day are feeding time, or does he just see you and anticipate food whenever he recognizes you?
It's hard to tell because we do have his tank rather close to the dinner table, just maybe 7 feet away from the dinner table. And when we sit down to eat dinner, he floats right up to his little feeding ring, which is in a fixed position in his tank, and waits for us to put some food in because right after dinner, that's typically what we do.
Okay, feeding ring. What is the feeding ring?
Feeding ring is simply a plastic ring that has a styrofoam core and with a suction cup attached to it, and then on a little sort of a hinge so that you can attach it to the tank and it will float up and down in response to the water level to a certain extent.
And that's so the food doesn't get all over?
Right. So the food will stay in one place, and you can either do that just for convenience in cleaning, or if you want to train the particular animal in question to come to a certain area, and that's what we've done.
One of the things you emailed me about that I thought was fascinating was that the majority of frogs eat insects, but you feed pellets to Hito?
Right. As an adaptation for living underwater, and often in fairly murky water in their natural habitat, they do not use an extensible tongue to catch their prey. It wouldn't work underwater. And they use their front limbs to kind of feel around in the water. They also have a very sensitive lateral line system like a fish does, so minor current fluctuations in the water are very detectable for them. And so they use a combination of those factors to find most of their food, and so they'll eat just about anything that was once living or is living, or they're not sure whether it was living or not. They'll give it a try, and that has proven very useful in these murky waters where they're from. So they do eat insects, they eat fish, they'll eat carrion, whatever that happens along, really.
Is there a food designed specifically for these frogs, or do you feed them fish food, or what do you give them?
There are a couple of types that are designed specifically for this species. I tend to give mine mostly foods that are reptile and amphibian based, not based, I should rephrase that. They are intended for reptiles and amphibians, turtles and newts and frogs and so on.
Now, when I listen to the song, it's a little hard for me to tell how loud it actually is. Is this something you could hear from the next room, or?
Yeah, I do notice if I'm in the hallway or the kitchen and he's in the living room, I do hear it. It's not really loud. It's nothing that would keep you awake at night or anything like that, although I do remember that the day before he sang, or the day before I first heard him singing, I dreamt that he sang. And so I'm wondering if I heard him and subconsciously realized that, and that's why I dreamt that.
Right. So if somebody lived in an apartment, people wouldn't be knocking on the walls next door when the frog was singing.
Right. It wouldn't be loud enough to carry that far, not through walls.
Does he tend to sing more at night than during the day?
Well, it's difficult to tell. I've noticed that since about September, which coincided with his first birthday, he has been singing a lot more. And it also happens to coincide approximately with spring in the natural habitat of these frogs, which is southern Africa. So I'm not sure whether it's breeding season or it's just that he's old enough, he's coming of age, and it's time to sing more. But he does sing during the day quite a bit. I've noticed that a lot of times he will sing if I come over to the tank and look at him.
Sure.
So he may be thinking, well, it's worth a try. Maybe I'll get some food out of this. I don't know.
So he has the one sort of trilling song, and then when it gets more excited, is that a separate song, or is it just sort of a amplification or emotional amplification of the first?
I'm not sure. I'm still wondering about that. Sometimes I think it may just be that he starts to move kind of frantically when he starts begging for food, and that affects the song, the movement of his body, but I'm not really sure.
And we're hearing that song through the water, of course.
Right.
Does he ever stick his head out of the water?
He does, but I haven't really noticed that when he's singing. He usually at least starts singing at the bottom of the aquarium. He just sticks his nose out to eat or to take a breath of air.
Okay, I was going to ask about that too. How often does he have to come to the surface to breathe?
That depends on his activity level and the temperature and so on, but he'll come up maybe every 5 minutes or so.
Wow, so his body uses oxygen very efficiently.
Right. Right, being cold-blooded and so on, they don't need a whole lot, and they probably absorb a little bit of oxygen through their skin, most amphibians do, but I think I read somewhere that most of this particular species, oxygen requirements come from lung breathing.
Sure. Now you, in one of the emails you sent me, you mentioned that there are some bizarre facts about African clawed frogs. Is there something that we haven't talked about already?
Let's see. Well, I don't think we mentioned that this frog was involved in early pregnancy tests.
Oh, no.
They were called the pregnancy frog at one time because in one of the earliest successful pregnancy tests, they would take some urine from a woman, a prospectively pregnant woman, and inject it into the frog, a female frog, and if she produced eggs within a certain period of time, then that was a positive sign of pregnancy.
Huh.
They've been in labs, partly because of that, but for other reasons. They're one of the earliest clones. I think they were the first cloned vertebrate, preceding Dolly the sheep by quite a long shot, because the sheep being the first mammalian clone, we have had amphibian clones for a lot longer. They also found that they produce their own natural antibiotics when they're injured, and so it's very unlikely for them to get infections. If they've been cut or something, it causes a release of these natural antibiotics, and they're looking into those for use with humans.
Oh, I would think so.
And let's see. Oh, another thing is that being such survivors, being able to survive in dry mud for months and all of these other things with their natural antibiotics, they have been introduced, unfortunately, into a lot of areas where they're not native. So there are little populations of them dotting the planet, which is unfortunate because being such successful feeders, they can damage the ecosystems where they live.
So they're sort of invasive species in some areas?
Right. In some areas they're an invasive species, and for that reason are illegal in some areas. So word to the wise, anyone contemplating getting this frog, it's wise to make sure that it has no way to escape.
Oh, okay. What is the attraction for you about keeping an entirely aquatic frog as a pet?
Well, the fact that they recognize people, that they clap hands and they clap their hands when they're ready to feed and so on. They respond so much to people. They are very food motivated, and I think that's part of the appeal. They will take food out of your hands. That makes it fun.
Mm-hmm.
They have a comical face. It almost looks like they're always just about to break into a grin, which is fun. And then they're really easy to take care of. Basically, you need an aquarium as you would have for fish. The filter needs to be a little special because most people think that because they have this sensitive lateral line system, loud splashing water noises would bother them, something like a jackhammer going off in your head. And so you need to find a very quiet filter.
So you wouldn't have a bubbler or even an air stone or something like that.
Right. And so I have a particular filter that's acoustically sealed, very, very quiet, and that seems to work just great. And then, of course, getting the food is really easy because you go pick up a little canister of pellets from the pet store, and that's all you need to do.
What is his environment like inside the tank?
Well, they do like a few hiding places, so I've got some terracotta pots, half a coconut shell, and so on, organized in a way that he can retire under there when he wants to. I've got a piece of driftwood, and I've got a few very hardy aquatic plants growing in there. Not something that most aquatic plants can handle because the frogs can be pretty boisterous, but I've got a few tough species in there that do fine.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do have a couple of other species living with him.
That's what I was going to ask you about.
Most aquatic creatures of any type wouldn't do well with this frog. If they're big enough to avoid being eaten, then they're probably looking at the frog as lunch. So you have to be careful about what you put in there. But I have a type of aquarium shrimp called a red cherry shrimp, that does just fine in there. They breed in there. He may occasionally pick one off. They're prolific enough that there's a healthy population going in there, and they help keep algae down.
Are these freshwater?
They are, and they're a lot of fun. I have them in a lot of my other tanks, and I figured I'd give them a try, and they seem to be working really well.
How many tanks do you have?
Somewhere around a dozen or so.
Oh my gosh.
So I have various species of fish and invertebrates of different kinds.
Yeah, it sounds like you must have a marine aquarium too if you have the feather duster worms.
Right. I do have one marine aquarium as well.
Well, we're going to have to do another show and talk about some of your other aquatic creatures if you would be willing to do that, because that's really interesting. I had feather duster worms back in the 70s when I kept fish, and technology wasn't really very good for marine aquariums back then unless you had a lot of money to spend. So I didn't have a lot of luck, but I'm assuming it's a little bit easier now.
It is. They've made great strides in especially the last 10 or 15 years that have just made things a lot easier. Still more expensive than freshwater, but just about as easy if you can buy the equipment.
What would be someone's prime concern or things they should be maybe a little wary of when they're keeping an African clawed frog?
Well, we did mention that they can hop out, and so you do need to be careful to make sure you have a secure cover and keep the water level low enough so that they can't squeeze their way out of the cover. I do both. I think that's the safest way to go around it. And then, once again, don't keep them with fish because they'll end up being eaten. Certain aquatic snails and shrimp that I've had success with, but I wouldn't try with any fish. And then make sure what species you're getting. The African dwarf frogs, to distinguish them, there are a couple things you can look at. The dwarfs have webbed front feet as well as back feet, and their eyes aim kind of sideways rather than pointing up, and their head is a little bit more pointed, and their legs in proportion to their body are more slender. And the dwarf frogs you can keep with fish as long as the fish are not big enough to bother them, but you wouldn't want to do that with the African frog. So.
Okay, just before we sign off, do you have a website, Russ?
I do. It's www.aquarimax.com, and that's AQUARIMAX.com.
And what will people find on your website?
I have some podcasts about various creatures that I've kept and basically how to take care of them and so on. I have various other resources involved with those, and I also culture live foods for fish and so on. If someone's interested in getting some of those, that they could do that as well on my website. So. Okay, and please repeat that URL again. Sure. It's www.aquarimax.com, AQUARIMAX.com. Well, that brings us to the end of our half hour. Thanks so much for talking to me. This is really great, and I want to talk to you again about some of your other creatures. Sure. It was great for me, and I'd be glad to come back and do another show. All right, great. Thanks. Well, so that's it for this week's episode of What Were You Thinking? If you would like to be a guest, if you have some sort of interesting exotic pet that you would like to talk about, just email me at bob@petliferadio.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much to my producer, Mark Winter. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thinking about buying a monkey? How about a ferret or a skunk? Then check out the show that will answer the burning questions: where do you get them? What do you feed them? How do you take care of them? And most of all, what were you thinking? With exotic pet expert and author Bob Tart, every week on demand from PetLifeRadio.com.